Well, it is official. It was finally announced. We do have the final four-team college football playoff members, and what a way for the four-team playoff to go out. I do want to share a few comments on these rankings. I did make this prediction earlier today before they were released, and it was correct exactly. I'm not taking a victory lap or anything, but yes, Alabama does make it in over FSU, and my opinion of FSU is very simple. The idea that we can have an undefeated Power 5 conference champion not make the playoff and it be the right decision, it goes to show you how ridiculous the four-team playoff really is. But this isn't a knock on the four-team playoff necessarily, because the four-team playoff was important in terms of the evolution of college football. This is more against the people that think we should stay at four teams or even go back to the BCS 2 teams. It is absolutely ridiculous. You look at a team like Georgia, they win 29, 30 straight games. They lose once, a 3-point loss to a top 5 Alabama team. They're completely out. They don't get to play for a national title. That's ridiculous. Ohio State basically gets penalized for playing Michigan on the road, and it being the last game of the season. If they would have lost to Michigan in week 1, they very likely would be a top 4 team right now. Also, you're talking about the Big Ten, the ridiculously unbalanced divisions, Iowa making the Big Ten championship instead of Ohio State. That's all going to change next year, thankfully, but it's just so ridiculous and so arbitrary. Also, the idea that Ohio State goes on the road against the now number 1 team in the country, loses by 6, outgains them, but they don't have a chance at a national title. It is so ridiculous. This doesn't happen in any other major sport in North America. I'm not saying they should expand it to 16 or 24 or do anything wild like that, but this expansion is absolutely the right decision, and this really illuminates why the idea that a team like Florida State, who's undefeated, doesn't make it, and it's actually the right call because of the circumstances. And again, guys, you want to talk about Florida State being undefeated, it's almost like it's inconsequential because Florida State was undefeated mainly based upon a quarterback that is not with the team anymore. Jordan Travis, the Heisman Trophy contender, possibly was going to finish top 5 in terms of that award. He's not there anymore. The backups have not done good. The idea that you can compare this Florida State team to Ohio State back in 2014 is absolutely ridiculous when you take into account the conference championship performance. An Ohio State team scores 59 points with Cardale Jones against a Wisconsin team that was ranked, that did have a good defense, compared to what FSU does against a bad Louisville team, barely scoring 16 points, having about 230 yards of total offense. Whether it's their second string or their third string quarterback, it does make sense on why the committee chose Alabama over FSU. And certainly any type of format that punishes a team for an injury where they're still undefeated but they can't have a chance at a national title, that needs to go. And that's why we're thankful we're going to be expanding. If you're talking about the 12-team playoff, FSU is very easily in, Ohio State is in, Georgia is in, but I'm actually going to say something that not a lot of people will say, because the one argument you'll get for the people that are against expansion is, oh, the games are meaningless. Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, they're all guaranteed to make the playoff. Those are the exact same people that would have said this preseason, USC with Caleb Williams, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. Of course, those same people would have said, oh, bro, if it's a 12-team playoff, obviously USC is going to make it. They can lose 2 or 3 games and still make it with Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley. They went 7-5. They would be out of the 12-team playoff. The games still matter in the regular season. You can't go 7-5, you can't go 8-4, and now, depending on how things turn, you might not even be able to go 9-3. If we would have had the 12-team playoff this year, I believe every team would be at least 10-2. So all of these arguments hold absolutely no weight. They're really not based off of anything. It's just narratives people pick up on and buzzwords. So guys, we are expanding. It needs to happen. Obviously, different years call for different arguments, and certainly last year was completely different, where you had a team like Ohio State lose to Michigan at home by a ton and still make the playoffs. This year they go on the road, lose a tough game and miss the playoff. That's just what happens. It's based on year to year, but with the expansion of the playoff, it should be a lot better. And a lot of these games should be a lot more palatable, especially when you consider Ohio State very likely going to be without a lot of their players now. They're not playing in a big time bowl game that's meaningful. Marvin Harrison Jr. sitting out. Georgia, same thing. A lot of their players, possibly Brock Bowers, sitting out. This is why we need every New Year's Six game to matter. It's going to matter when we expand the playoff. It's very important that that happens, and it will be happening next year. Another funny thing I wanted to just talk about. So Michigan was the number 1 overall seed. And if you're Michigan, there is the idea, it's almost like you want to choose your opponent, right? You're the number 1 overall seed. Obviously, they get to choose where they play. But Michigan fans and their players, the reaction to facing Alabama, finding out during the grand reveal that Alabama was the number 4 team. It was actually funny because I was live streaming this and I had it on mute. And they put like Georgia on the screen. And I was like, oh my God, Georgia is the number 4 team. Like I thought that for a split second. But of course they were doing their gimmicky thing where they put Georgia at number 6 and then they have just 4 and 5. But yeah, then Alabama gets revealed and you hear this gasp, amongst Michigan players and fans, and it was just funny. But listen, Michigan could certainly beat Alabama. I do know that game opened Michigan -2.5. It's been bet down to 1 the last time I checked, so it's basically a pick'em game. It is a very tough draw for Michigan. If you compare the top 4 teams, if I was Michigan, I would rather face Texas than Alabama. But to me, all 4 of these teams are very evenly matched. I don't think it's like anything crazy. You do have the Texas-Washington game. Texas sitting 4-point favorites over Washington, who is undefeated. Maybe some people surprised by that, but they were also surprised by Oregon being 9.5-point favorites over Washington. Washington is not liked analytically. It does not surprise me at all that even though Washington is undefeated, they're sitting 4.5-point underdogs. But guys, I did just want to talk about the college football playoff. This is why it needs to expand. I do think the committee chose the right teams, but even then, this is the whole other thing. People always say it's best versus most deserving, and I always say it's always a combination of the two. Because if you're going to go by most deserving, you would obviously have FSU in front of Alabama because they're undefeated. Alabama has 1 loss. If you're going to go by best, you would have Georgia in front of, pick your poison, Texas, because you would think Georgia on a neutral field would be big favorites over Texas, or at least 3 or 4-point favorites. You would possibly have Ohio State in as a 4 seed, so it's always a combination of best and most deserving. People get focused on that. They say it's one or the other. It's a combination. They really don't know what they're doing. They try and just put the best teams, kind of a combination of best and most deserving when it comes to the college football playoff. And that is the final 4-team playoff of the year. And next year, you're talking about a team like Liberty, who's undefeated, making it. Very likely they would get steamrolled, but it's still an interesting matchup. We would have these intriguing matchups next week that we're just not going to get. We have to wait a month now to see these games actually be played, the 4-team playoff, and now de facto meaningless New Year's Six Bowls, where a lot of these players are going to sit out. You've got a lot of players on Georgia probably very disappointed. They expect to be in the playoff every year. Same thing with Ohio State. This is what we're trying to nip in the butt. These meaningless New Year's Six games, and the playoff expansion will do that, even if you have to sacrifice a little bit in terms of regular season games mattering slightly less. It's worth it because at the end of the season, all of the games are going to matter, and you're going to actually have a playoff system like other leagues rather than waiting an entire month, having 2 meaningful games, and then having the national title. I do think it is a significantly better way to do things. And another quick thing I wanted to mention when it comes to the Heisman Trophy, guys, I was very surprised when I saw Jaden Daniels. I was told this, -1,400 to win the Heisman, so he's locked it up completely. What a strange year it was for the Heisman, Jaden Daniels. His best win was against Missouri. They really don't have any other good wins, but his stats are amazing. I don't know, man. I would want to give it to Penix, but Penix's numbers are just not very good. Like 32 touchdowns, 8 interceptions in this day and age. That's just not Heisman worthy. And I know Penix is undefeated. Daniels has the 3 losses. I think Daniels kind of ran up his stats against Army and Georgia State, but it looks like he's going to win the award. I mean, he's basically a lock if you look at the total Vegas odds. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.